Jessica Buchanan remembers being asked, "Do you want to die today?" For 93 days, Somali pirates repeated that threat to Jessica Buchanan, a humanitarian held at gunpoint for a $45 million ransom, while U.S. negotiators refused to pay a cent. What nobody knew was that America was already planning to unleash SEAL Team 6, the same elite unit that killed Osama bin Laden. Parachuting 24 operators from 20,000 feet into a hostile desert during a solar storm, they would risk everything to snatch her from a camp guarded by 26 armed men, while President Obama watched the mission unfold live. But how do you rescue someone moments from death, when every decision could cost a life? The answer begins with Jessica's nightmare. October 25th, 2011. Jessica Buchanan's Land Cruiser rumbled along a cracked, dusty road in central Somalia, part of a small convoy headed for a staff training session. She had spent years working for the Danish Refugee Council, designing lessons to help children steer clear of landmines. That morning, the landscape stretched empty and silent until 3 vehicles blocked the path. Armed men spilled into the road, faces hard, rifles raised. One pirate yanked open the door and jammed an AK-47 against her head. Jessica froze, heart pounding, as shouts in Somali filled the air. The convoy's drivers and guards were forced out at gunpoint. Buchanan and her Danish colleague Pole Hagen Thisted were dragged from their seats and shoved into a waiting car. The pirates rifled through their bags, searching for valuables, barely glancing at the humanitarian identification cards. Jessica's mind flashed back to the offhand joke she had made to her husband before leaving. "If I get kidnapped, will you come get me?" Now, hands shaking, she watched as her captors sped away from the road, bouncing across the desert with no idea where they were headed. Inside the vehicle, the air was thick with sweat and the chemical scent of khat. The pirates chewed constantly, their teeth stained green, eyes darting with a wild, unfocused energy. Every time the car slowed, Jessica braced for violence. She wondered if they would kill her, or simply leave her behind in the wasteland. The pirates barked orders, arguing over who would guard the foreigners. One pressed the muzzle of his rifle into Jessica's side and demanded her wedding ring. She handed it over, her hands trembling. Sunlight faded as the convoy wound deeper into the scrubland, away from any hope of rescue. The kidnapping was fast, chaotic, and brutal. In less than 5 minutes, Jessica's life had been torn away from everything familiar. The pirates made no attempt to hide their intentions. They wanted ransom, millions of dollars, more than anyone could possibly pay for 2 aid workers. As the vehicles finally stopped in a remote patch of desert, Jessica and Powell were forced out and surrounded by men with guns. The threat was immediate and constant. There was no chance to run, no one to plead with. The only rule was survival. Night fell quickly, bringing a chill that cut through the thin fabric of Jessica's clothes. The pirates barked at her to sit on the ground. She could hear them arguing, counting their loot, and calling someone on a battered cell phone. The realization settled in. She was now a hostage, held by men who saw her as nothing more than a payday. The first day of captivity had begun, and there was no telling when or if it would end. Jessica's world shrank to a patch of desert and the constant presence of armed men. The pirates never stayed in one place for long. Every few days, they forced Jessica and Powell to climb into battered vehicles, driving for hours beneath a sky that offered no shade and no promise of rescue. The ground was their bed, hard, cold at night, blistering by day. Sometimes wind whipped sand into their eyes and mouths until breathing felt like swallowing grit. Water was rationed. Meals, when they came, were little more than scraps of rice or stale bread. Malnutrition set in slowly, sapping her strength. Guarding the hostages was a rotating crew, sometimes as many as 26, mostly young men or even boys, some barely old enough to grow a beard. The pirates worked in shifts, arguing over who would watch the foreigners, who would sleep, who would get the best cut of khat. Jessica studied them, searching for patterns. Most kept their distance. A few seemed almost curious, but the threat never lifted. Rifles were always within reach, and every movement was watched under the eyes of guards. To survive, Jessica learned to hide her fear. She kept her voice calm, her face blank, even as the pirates taunted her with the same question, day after day. "Do you want to die today?" She answered with silence, refusing to give them the reaction they wanted. She counted the guards, the hours, the days. She made up stories for herself, a life outside this prison, a future beyond the sand and the guns. She invented a son, giving him the name of her childhood dog. In Somali culture, mothers are respected. Jessica hoped this fiction might make her captors see her as more than a bargaining chip, maybe even less likely to be harmed. The pirates never asked for proof. They just nodded, sometimes offering a rare smile before returning to their posts. The ransom demand, when it came, was almost laughable. $45 million. Jessica's first thought was, "I'm not a ship." She knew no one would pay that much for 2 aid workers. The pirates did not care. They made their calls, shouting into cell phones, haggling with voices on the other end. As the days dragged on, the price tag hung over her head like a sentence with no end. Sleep was rare. Jessica and Powell lay side by side, wrapped in thin blankets, listening for footsteps in the dark. Sometimes the guards would move them in the middle of the night, shoving them into cars and driving until dawn. The constant relocations blurred together. Each new camp looked like the last. Bare ground, thorny bushes, a circle of men with guns. Hope faded with every sunrise, replaced by the dull ache of survival. The only certainty was that nothing would stay the same for long except the waiting. Hundreds of miles away from Somalia's shifting desert camps, a team of FBI specialists gathered in a windowless room at Camp Lemonnier, Djibouti. Their screens glowed with drone feeds and streams of intercepted phone calls, each data point a possible clue to Jessica Buchanan's location. The pirates holding her rarely stayed still. One day the hostages were spotted near the outskirts of Adado. 2 days later, they had vanished. The camp picked up and moved under the cover of darkness. The desert offered endless places to hide, but it also left tracks, tire marks, heat signatures, bursts of radio chatter. Intelligence was being written on every screen. The FBI technical teams relied on an evolving mix of signals intelligence and aerial surveillance. Drones orbited high above the sand, capturing infrared images of vehicles clustered in the emptiness. Cell phone towers, scattered across Somalia's patchwork of clans and warlords, provided another layer. Whenever a pirate made a call, even for a few seconds, the signal bounced off distant towers and revealed a rough position. Analysts compared these digital breadcrumbs with drone images, working to narrow down the camp's location to within a few miles. The pirates were careful, switching SIM cards and moving phones from one guard to another. Still, mistakes happened. A call to negotiate ransom, a brief check-in with a clan leader, a heated argument between captors, all of it left a trace. FBI linguists monitored the calls in real time, flagging words that hinted at movement or distress. Each intercepted conversation was cross-referenced with drone footage and geographic data. Mistakes created openings. The camp itself was never permanent. Sometimes the hostages spent 3 days in one spot, sometimes just a few hours. The pirates forced Jessica and Powell to pack up at a moment's notice, loading them into battered land cruisers and driving for hours across the scrub. The FBI's challenge was to keep up, mapping each new site as soon as it appeared. At one point, analysts tracked the convoy as it crossed a dry riverbed, the vehicles visible as faint blurs on a drone's thermal camera. By the time a team on the ground could have reached them, the camp had already moved again. Movement defined the hunt. Despite the constant relocations, a pattern started to emerge. The pirates circled within a rough radius north of Adado, never straying more than a day's drive from their clan's home territory. The U.S. base in Djibouti, nearly 500 miles away, became the central hub for all intelligence. Every new piece of information, an overheard threat, a drone-captured campfire, a sudden silence on the airwaves, was fed into the system, building a live map of possible locations. Pattern and persistence made the map sharper. As the weeks dragged on, the pressure mounted. The window for a rescue could open and close in a single day. The FBI's ability to pinpoint the camp even as it moved would determine whether a strike team could reach Jessica before her captors decided to disappear for good. Rescue depended on speed and accuracy. An intercepted phone call from the desert shattered the stalemate. Jessica Buchanan's voice, weak and trembling, carried across the line to FBI negotiators in Nairobi. She broke down, sobbing, and whispered, "I think "I'm afraid I'm going to die." The words were relayed up the chain, stripped of hope, and landed on the desk of the President of the United States. Medical experts reviewing the latest intelligence delivered a blunt prognosis. Buchanan's untreated urinary tract infection had spread to her kidneys. Without antibiotics, she would not survive another 2 weeks. The calculus changed in an instant. What had been a waiting game now became a race against the clock. Inside the White House, President Obama gathered his advisors. The latest drone feeds and surveillance intercepts confirmed the hostages' location, but the risks of an assault remained high. The pirates were still armed, the camp still mobile, and the terrain unforgiving. Yet the alternative, waiting, now meant certain death for an American citizen. The president listened as military physicians explained the timeline. Pyelonephritis, they said, could turn fatal in days, not weeks. There was no way to get medicine to Buchanan. Only extraction, immediate and violent, offered any hope. The decision was made at the highest level. President Obama authorized the use of force, directing the Joint Special Operations Command to mobilize SEAL Team 6's Blue Squadron. The same unit that had executed the bin Laden raid would now be tasked with bringing Jessica Buchanan home, alive if possible. The order triggered a cascade of preparations across continents. Aircraft fueled, equipment checked, operators briefed. There would be no ransom, no negotiation, and no room for error. The resources committed dwarfed the pirates' demands. Surveillance planes, drones, intelligence analysts, and a full complement of special operations forces were readied. The cost, running into tens of millions, was not up for debate. Policy dictated that no price was too high to rescue an American held hostage. At Camp Lemonnier in Djibouti, the mission details came together in a secure briefing room. The operators studied satellite imagery, mapped out approach routes, and rehearsed contingencies. Back in Washington, the president received regular updates. Every hour counted. The window for a successful rescue was closing, and the consequences of delay were clear. The go order was transmitted. The point of no return had arrived. In the coming hours, a team of 24 would cross the Horn of Africa under cover of darkness, carrying the weight of a nation's promise and the urgency of a life slipping away. A C-130 Hercules roared through the night sky over central Somalia, its cargo bay packed with 24 SEAL Team 6 operators. Each man carried his own parachute, oxygen system, and enough firepower for a small war. The ramp dropped open at 20,000 feet. One by one, the SEALs stepped into the freezing black, vanishing into the void above the desert. Freefall began instantly, bodies slicing through the air at speeds topping 120 miles per hour. The wind battered them, 40 knots, rougher than forecast, threatening to scatter the team across miles of sand. Oxygen masks fogged with breath as altimeters ticked toward the pull point. Chutes snapped open, catching the wind, and the operators drifted in near silence, guided only by the faint glow of GPS screens and the distant horizon. The landing was chaos. Some SEALs touched down on target. Others were dragged hundreds of yards by gusts, tumbling across hard-packed earth and thorny brush. Night vision goggles revealed nothing but endless scrub and the faint outlines of teammates regrouping in the darkness. There was no time to rest. Weapons checked, packs hoisted, the team formed up and began the long march toward the objective. The desert heat lingered even at night, sweat-soaking uniforms as the men moved in formation, every step calculated to avoid noise. For over 1 hour they advanced, using hand signals and silent discipline. No stray word, no wasted motion. In the distance, the pirate camp waited, unaware that shadows were closing in. The SEALs halted 1,600 feet from the pirate camp, kneeling in the sand as night pressed in around them. Weapons raised, they split into 2 silent groups, fanning out left and right to box in the target. Snipers crawled into position, scanning the camp through thermal scopes. The only sound was the wind in the brush and the distant crackle of a pirate's campfire. Inside the ring of tents, 9 pirates lounged with rifles close by, unaware of the danger closing in. Infrared laser sights, visible only through night vision, painted invisible dots on each guard. Then the order came. Go. Gunfire shattered the night. Snipers fired first, dropping pirates on the perimeter before anyone could react. The rest of the team surged forward, moving between tents and brush. Two pirates grabbed Jessica Buchanan, shoving her to the ground and aiming their weapons at her torso. She pressed her face into the dirt, hands over her head, convinced she would die in the crossfire. Bullets tore through the darkness. The SEALs closed in, dropping both guards with pinpoint shots. One operator sprinted to Jessica's side, shielding her with his body as the last pirates fell. A wall of armed men formed around her and pulled Thisted, rifles outward, eyes scanning for any threat. Jessica stayed curled on the ground, heart pounding, until a voice cut through the chaos. An American accent, calm and unmistakable, called her name. She looked up into the face of a stranger, helmeted, masked, but alive. He leaned down and said the words she had prayed for. "We're here to take you home." Today, American citizens working abroad still face the threat of kidnapping. Ransom demands now average over $1.5 million worldwide. The U.S. policy remains no concessions, no negotiation. Each mission like this one signals that no cost is too high to bring Americans home. But for every rescue, the stakes and the questions about risk, resolve, and response only grow sharper. What would your country do? Share your thoughts below.